Good day and welcome to Circle of Fellows, episode 104. My name is Brad Whitworth and I'm sitting in for Shell Holtz, who would normally be the moderator. He's got another assignment today, but I'm glad to be joined by a Circle of Fellows, as it's called. And I'll let each one of you introduce yourself, starting with the person to my right on the screen is George McGrath from the East Coast.
Thank you, Brad, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I am an IABC fellow since 2014, and that's following about 30 years in the public relations and corporate communications field, working at both large agencies and my own business. And this has been a great, preparing for this episode has been great because I'm thinking about the ethical dilemmas I've kind of faced over the years, or I've seen other people deal with, and what worked and what didn't. And it's getting more and more difficult these days to manage your way through those things, with all the challenges we have from AI, deep fakes, and other things, and what is the truth and who defines what the truth is. So looking forward to the discussion.
And joining us in this discussion of ethics in communication from the UK is Jane Mitchell.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here and with this illustrious group of, or the circle, I should say. I have been involved with the IABC since 2009, became a fellow about 4 years ago. My professional role is working with organizations that have suffered severe ethical failure and generally focuses on development, helping them to unearth leadership skills and habits that they might need to change, and sitting on company boards, helping organizations to think about how they ethically drive their organizations with values at the heart of what they do. So really looking forward, like George, to this conversation.
And coming our way from just north of the border, a little bit further north from me, is Jennifer Waugh.
Hi, everyone. I am based here in North Vancouver, where I do consulting on storytelling and teach business communications to business students. It's interesting. I'm always fascinated about the intersection of academic integrity and ethics and how that unfolds in our profession. I also am currently serving as past chair of the IABC Global Ethics Committee. So this is one of my favorite sort of geeky topics right now. And we have some great and interesting discussions within the committee and within our communities about the ways in which communication professionals are challenged by ethical choices these days, which are different than they've ever been.
And just so that you know where I am and who I am, Brad Whitworth, I am coming to you from Northern California wine country. When I am not out tending to the grapes in the vineyard behind me, I'm also doing full-time communications for Pacific Gas and Electric, the utility that serves like 16 million customers across Northern California. So I have a day job and I have to be a farmer at times, but growing some fun stuff. So the topic, I think this may be one of the first times that the Circle of Fellows has had a chance to deal with the ethics topic with the new twist of AI being in the forefront. And to me, the interesting part about AI is that it seems maybe a third of the emails that I get today promoting something are, oh, attend this AI conference and learn about the tools of AI. And so in addition to it creeping into different parts of our world, we're also being bombarded with here are the tools, let's go. So maybe we could talk a little bit about how it is affecting our lives. I mean, where are you seeing it and how's it showing up in your part of the world? Not
anybody.
You stunned us into silence, Brad.
Well,
almost impossible, Jane.
It won't last long, I'm sure.
No. Well, maybe I'll throw out that whole notion of since some of our listeners and members are more recently into the profession and out of school. Like, again, it's interesting for me to observe the seed of some of what we face planted during university and college days with the whole idea of academic integrity. And and the ways in which young people are navigating the gray areas these days. Like Brad, you talk about this being the first time that in this context we're talking about AI as it relates to our own ethics. But how are young people going to navigate some of the choices they are more they've grown up with? And I see that with my students who really do struggle with understanding kind of where they begin and someone else's content ends, because of the ways they've grown up with that. So I don't know. I just think it's an interesting landscape to navigate for us, for me, with the next generation of communication professionals in terms of what decision-making skills and tools and critical thinking skills, which is what I'm most interested in them taking out of my classes. And by the way, I encourage the use of AI in my business writing and business communications class. I don't want them out there in the work world not understanding the strengths and limitations of a tool like that, with parameters, of course, in the academic setting. But they do one major project at the end of the term, and I say, go crazy. And it's a video and audio project. And, within a week, they'll come back to me and say, yeah, that cover image we were going to try and do with AI, it's got 5 hands. So we're going to just, one of our team is going to sketch something instead.
Mm-hmm.
So, there certainly are at this stage some limitations.
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing things like Katy Perry at the Met Gala wearing an extravagant gown, and her mother's going, "That's an amazing dress," and Katy was like, "I was not there. I'm working and not there." And Rihanna also appeared at the Met Gala, but she wasn't at the Met Gala. So there's this, is that an ethical thing? I mean, is this what they would have worn if they were there kind of thing? So, I mean, we're seeing it sort of around the fringes, moving toward us in all parts of our lives. And I think I saw a statistic that something like 80% of marketing departments now are experimenting with, toying with, using AI for a number of different applications, from the let's get some of the mundane tasks out of the way to some of the more creative things. So Jane, you were going to add on to Jennifer.
Yeah, I don't know which to pick now. Because I was going to pick up from Jennifer, because like George was saying, in preparing and thinking about important areas to consider, I was looking at the number of students. I was thinking, well, if I were a student doing a thesis or a paper, I would use AI to help me. There's no question that I would. I mean, why wouldn't you? When I was studying and writing papers that I had to submit as opposed to a client, we didn't have the internet, let alone AI. Well, we might have had AI, but it was never called that. But we certainly didn't have an internet. And so I think that the question for me, when Jennifer was talking, what was making me think about it was, I was looking up a piece of research. So forgive me, I don't want to quote a wrong number. So there was a piece of research done on a website called Tech Radar, which may be familiar to people. And it said, the headline was, it's official, millions of students are using AI to write their papers. Okay, really? I mean, is that very much of a surprise? I think, to Jennifer's really sensible, pragmatic point, nowadays, this is what they are going to use as a resource. 3% of student work was 80% AI generated. The issue becomes when there's no original personal thinking from anybody, whether they're professionally working as a communicator and creating narrative or even precedent, whatever it might be. But I think at that student age, I think it's really important. It's so important for them to understand that it is yet another resource, which we didn't have when we were doing what we were doing, learning to do what we were doing, but to use it judiciously and make sure that it doesn't become just the catch-all and the fallback. I think that's going to be the nuance, and I think that applies to AI generally, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's such a big thing in the news right now, trending topic, and with so many different aspects, that it's front of mind for people. And if you ask them to define what AI was, I don't know. It's what is it? HAL 9000? Is it a robot? Is it something that's going to take over the world? And the truth is, it's just sort of sifting through these language models and finding things that match up and try to draw some conclusions from it. And it's only as good as what's in the database, what's out there. And there's a lot of junk out there. So I think it's not that we shouldn't be concerned about where that technology is going, but I'm more concerned about bigger ethical issues around just the kind of things we sort of accept as ethical these days or not, or we don't feel the need for ethics in general. And I think that's something really to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, we've had reference libraries, and when some of us went to school, you had to go and do the research, and you were pouring through books and periodicals, and this is just sort of like that experience on steroids with a lot of help. I have been using an AI-assisted device to do some, I'll call it extra chores. I just ran one where I had created a script that was going to be used for video, and somebody said, now can you do a story that's about this video? And it's like, okay, I'm just going to put the script into AI and see if it can come up with a 400-page summary. And since it was my words that I was asking it to repackage, I didn't feel too bad. But I think it's when it's somebody else's intellectual property, if it's something that's original, we're getting into a little bit dicier territory.
Mm-hmm.
And, George, I was just going to pick up on, based on that, Brad, and then also, George, something you said, like that our use of a tool like this is only as good as the information that we're harvesting, to borrow Brad's farmer terminology. And I would add to that, not just the information that we're culling through and curating, but also our own critical thinking and our ability to filter and to put our own sets of values, which includes in our case a code of ethics, to put information through that. When we have to put in a tiny plug for the work of IABC and its ethics committee, we just this past couple of months developed a set of guiding principles for the ethical use of AI by communication professionals, and so that's available as a resource, and there are several other sets of guiding principles, et cetera, from other organizations as well. But what I found interesting in the committee discussions leading to what we published, we took IABC's original code of ethics and went through the articles or the principles and asked ourselves, how do these apply to AI? And the bottom line in every case, and therefore our overarching credo really regarding the principles regarding for the ethical use of AI, was that it needs to be human-led. So let's use the tools. That are at our disposal, that make our jobs more efficient, that make us more efficient, that do tasks that perhaps our brains, we could use our brains in other ways, as long as we are applying a final human filter on it all. So again, George, just to bookend your comment, it's the information that we're gathering and filtering through, and then in the end, it's our own filter on it. And same in your example, Brad, you were filtering and kind of repackaging your own work, and that's human led.
I wanted to, speaking of, just 1 second, Jane, I want to introduce one more person to the panel.
Oh, great.
Todd Hattori is joining us from the Seattle area. So welcome, Tosh.
Hi, Tosh.
Glad to have
Thank
you in.
you.
We're diving in on this, the AI implications around ethics in communication, let's get started there and see where it goes. And I'm going to ask Jane Mitchell to keep it up, because you had an idea right out of Jan.
Well, I was going to pick up Jen, on the the AI principles for communicators, it's on the IABC website, which I did look at, you'll be pleased to hear. And what really struck me about them, and it's been reinforced by what you have said, the human-led, and as I look at it here, I think another which relates to what the three of you have just been talking about, which is about bias. As you said, the information that we're provided on the system is only as good as the input. And of course, that will exponentially grow and grow and grow. But I think that, and the other thing was, next one, I'm responsible for content generated by AI and must independently fact check. I was really struck by that when I think that if we think about how we should be conducting ourselves as communication professionals, if you take out AI from that sentence, that's precisely what we should be doing. And without going into, because we could talk about this for another 10 days, we have here a couple of major institutional breakdowns in trust and ethics with the Post Office Horizon inquiry, which is about the implementation of a new system for use in post office counters. Post offices being shops whereby you can send your mail, you can bank, you can buy stamps, take your pension out, that kind of retail outlet here in the UK. And another is the infected blood scandal, which has impacted 30,000 people, killed 3,000 people, and all the families around them. And what is central to those terrible, terrible examples, desperate examples, is a lack of removal of bias and a lack of standing back and looking at the facts, and however unpleasant or however difficult the messages were, being able to be courageous enough and saying, okay, there is definitely something wrong here because this is not connecting up. And I have always said, and I believe this to be true, that communicators within organizations stand as a pivotal point doing just that. And it doesn't matter whether it now, I think, is becoming more complex because we do have AI generated material, but that is how we should be doing what we do anyway. And when we don't, the implications are horrific. I'm not saying, of course, we're singularly responsible. Of course, that's not the case. But we do have a very significant role to play.
Yeah, and it's not just sins of commission; it's sins of omission. Sometimes, it's
Exactly.
we're in a crisis situation. Let's put a standby statement together that summarizes what we know, and try to keep it very positive. We'll fix it. We'll deal with it. We'll answer some factual questions, and we'll get out of here. The fact is that a lot of these situations got a lot of twists and turns to them. There's a lot that really the public probably has a right to know, should know, and that's the balance you got to work as a communicator. Sometimes, if you want to be the counselor to management, you got to go to the top management meeting and go through these things with them and say, look, we're not getting enough information out there, and ultimately this is going to bite us.
Yeah.
Well, there was one that was in the news that maybe we could sort of weigh in on, is the whole, is AI grabbing more than just a star's voice? I mean, there was the whole Scarlett Johansson, who was in a movie, her voice was used for a bot. And then all of a sudden, OpenAI is introducing something that sounds like her. She thinks it's her. Washington Post put out a story saying, well, it really wasn't her, and the woman who was hired may have sounded like her, but wasn't, and there's an agent to prove it all. Where are the guardrails on all of this? And, are tech companies allowed to sort of go and grab anything that they want? And what happens to intellectual property in the sort of the AI world?
And I'll have to see how the New York Times makes out with the lawsuit. It's that's the bigger question. we shouldn't get distracted by these sideshows of people's celebrities' images being captured, because I think for every celebrity who's concerned about it, there's somebody out there who's like later on in their career who says, look, this would be a great thing, asset for my children, my grandchildren, my successors going down for years. You know, the Rolling Stones can be playing as an AI generated group for the next 500 years, and they're just as good as the real thing. Well, of course, not really, but that's how it's going to be sold. So the question, I think it relates to the tech companies on this, or big corporate interests in general, is who elected them to make these decisions for us? I think if the company, my answer would be, well, the market elected me to do this. People like this. They're responding to it. I'm giving people what they want. So I don't need the regulators involved in my business telling me what to do. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to lobby against that, put money against doing that. So that, I think, should be a concern. It's beyond the communication profession, but for us as responsible citizens, who do we really want making these decisions for us? Or do we want some to be some kind of collective check over what's being done, to the degree of, look, you really should stress test this before you put it out there. I think the examples right now are kind of mundane in terms of the way AI could be causing problems. For example, in New York City, there's just a thing, note in the news today about one of the smaller departments in the mayor's office created an AI chatbot that could help you if you were a small business dealing with city regulations. And you can pose it questions and it'll come back with a nice dialogue and answer things. And that stuff tends to be pretty mundane. But somebody posted a question there saying, hey, I collect unemployment insurance from my employees. Do I have the option of not doing that? Or could I put some of that money somewhere else? And the AI program is just gathering up all this stuff about the rules. It says, yes, well, this is what the purpose of that unemployment insurance is, and sure, you can do that. You can hold on to some of it if you don't want to, put it in and do it later. Well, problem with that is if you do that, eventually the government's going to get after you. You get a huge fine for that if you withhold those things. I don't think any serious person would do that, but there's plenty of people in small businesses who have no ideas. They don't have professional help, that accountants and lawyers look at that stuff, and they got a potential of getting in trouble with it. So it's got to be, I think there's a role for regulation in it. And that's clearly not there right now. And it's going to be the debate. I think it'll be not the debate in the elections here, but it's going to be a debate certainly in Congress. And the amount of money that's going to fly around it is huge. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear that when I joined in, I was pleased to hear that the conversation is around personal accountability. And so I have a kind of an interesting, unique perspective, perhaps, within my organization. My team owns looking at AI and how it may be leveraged to increase or improve employee performance and efficiencies. And so, as we're dealing with various vendors who are eager to sell us their new AI technology that is not quite ready to deliver what they hope it will deliver, we're having to ask the question, do we want to make this move? Is it a responsible decision to move forward when we know that the technology isn't quite there? So when we think about what has happened recently with Scarlett Johansson, everyone's afraid. Initially, they're afraid that AI is going to replace them. And if we step back in every situation and ask, okay, today it's Scarlett Johansson, tomorrow is it me? Am I going to be replaced? Am I going to be a fake image of me created, or my voice created? And so, helping as communicators, we should kind of step back and think about how are we using AI to benefit. But then is there the potential, are we creating potential harm because we're looking at the benefit over the people aspect?
I think that's a good point. There was a great piece done by Zeynep Tufekci from the New York Times, which I love her thinking on all of this stuff. And she said, I'm someone who believes in the true upside of technology, including AI, but amid all that lofty talk about its transformational power, these companies are perpetuating an information grab, a money grab, and a break the rules and see what we can get away with mentality that's worked very well for them for the past few decades. So when you think you're an industry star in the tech, they sort of let you do anything because you're experimenting and you're building new capabilities, but there's the who's putting the guardrails in place, who's watching the hen house.
You know, all of this kind of brings to mind, and again, George, you mentioned about, you know, who we have to talk to, who as professionals, as individuals, within organizations and within our community. And again, to kind of draw on my academic experience, one of the things I admire about the way the UBC Sauder School of Business has approached academic integrity is the idea of it, you know, holding fast to guidelines and rules, but also the idea of it being a conversation. So I think, you know, from when we're very, very little, when we're faced with, you know, a fib or a lie, or a situation where we might be inclined to do that, that's something we're taught societally to bury and to not ever talk about. It's a secret. And that's often for good reason or not good reason. You know, we don't want to get our allowance taken away, or we don't want to, you know, that the impact of that increases obviously as we go through life. But one of the things that I feel really passionate about is creating communities and places where we can discuss our dilemmas. And I'm you know, I'll make the plug. I'm really grateful for IABC for that. And I think we need to do more of it. But also within organizations, like what kind of cultures are we creating within organizations such that those dilemmas and those hard choices can be aired, and we can weigh in without judgment, and in order for everyone to come to a conclusion together and own that conclusion together. I tell the anecdote about years ago when I used to be involved with the IABC's former accreditation program, and we'd have an ethics quiz as preparation for the actual exam, the accreditation exam. And one of the participants, one time around, you know, people would do their ethics quiz, and then we would discuss it as a group. And ethics is often gray areas. And one of the participants at one point said, you know, put up her hand, and she said, "I've come to the conclusion that the most ethical answer or response to these scenarios is often the hardest thing you could imagine doing. So, are you going to quit your job because your values don't align with an organization? Are you going to call someone out?" And I often use that as a bit of a gut check. Like, what would be the hardest thing I could imagine doing in this situation? It may or may not be the most ethical thing, but it's worth considering the spectrum of possibilities. And we need people around to talk that through with.
I think that's exactly right. And those examples I gave of organizations, I mean, they're just today. And certainly, I'm sure we can all think of many, sadly, organizations that have done precisely what you've just said, Jennifer, and made decisions based on a single line or point of reference, and they haven't connected with others in the community to work out whether or not that single reference point is correct. And I think it will come back to bite you. And if you haven't got that culture of psychological safety or a culture of candor, I think as a professional, a communication professional, forgive me, you spot that really quickly, because I'm really, you've brought to mind the Wells Fargo joy and all the terrible things that went on there. And right at the heart of that inquiry, and the evidence that was found later, was that one of the key players was manipulating presentations that had been done by the communication team. And when I say manipulating, the communication team had been upfront and were talking about issues that they felt leaders needed to know. This particular individual, who was one of those leaders, and about whom they were talking about her area, actually took hold of those presentations and said, okay, thanks very much, but I'll sort them out and do what I need to do. So what do you do? So that's a real dilemma, I think. I mean, what do you do as a communicator in those situations when the boss has given you a brief, you've delivered the brief, and then it's not quite the right answer, even though it's perfectly factual? So how do you deal with that? And I think you're absolutely right. It's about the quality of the decision making that goes around these dilemmas, recognizing that it is a dilemma in the first place, which is very often the first hurdle. But then being able to have that open conversation that says, look, there are some really severe implications of this, and we need to decide together. And I think that is a real signal to your point about communicators. Okay, so where do we go in this environment?
And I think it's important to extend the conversation beyond our communication network. So I completely agree with Jennifer, your comment that we need a place to go and discuss. Back when I was ethics chair, we often talked about what really makes a dilemma, and it's where where you have the conflict of what is ethical and what is legal. And so, having the conversation with, for example, the legal folks in the legal profession on what ethics, what legal considerations there would be for usage of AI, and then balancing that with what is ethical. So that partnership is really important within organizations to come up with the right policies or guidelines around how we use AI so that it's not only ethical, but it's also legal.
And I think we've even hit upon this a little bit earlier, but the whole idea of at some point we are probably going to have to get some guardrails put in by the legal profession of are we playing by a new set of rules or the ones that we learned about intellectual property and what belongs to whom and for how long, and copyright laws and all sorts of things are going to have to be reevaluated given the new technology. I'll let you think about that for a second. Just one quick reminder that if you do have a question or want to make a comment on what it is that we're talking about, be sure to put it in the comments box and it'll pop up here on our screen. We'll be able to bring it to life. So, thank you guys for watching, but back to the conversation, because I think that is important. It's like a meeting of the minds, and we need to get some really smart people weighing in on this.
And to the points that have been made, like diverse perspectives, and not just from within our own echo chambers, and to acknowledge that it's okay to say, I don't know what to do. I'm faced with this dilemma, and none of us might know what to do. And I mean that not just within a closed conversation, but outwardly too, right? That we're in an era of transparency, and you're absolutely right. All of these conversations are generally going to come back to bite us, whether we say them out loud from the beginning or not. So that idea of transparency, while to Tosha's point, maintaining legal upholding legal guidelines and premises as well, for organizations. So, you think about organizations with perhaps dealing with union issues or other, other such sensitive internal matters, and there is only a certain degree of transparency you can exercise there, depending on the timing, right? So anyway,
I'd add to that your position in the organization. I remember years ago, Citicorp put together a great training exercise that was really based upon ethics and asking questions of teams. And they had done a little bit of gamification and turned it into pull a card out of and as a group discuss what's the right answer, A, B, C, or D. And it turns out some of the answers were blatantly wrong. Some were righter than others, but also depends. If you're a brand new person, an acceptable answer might be ask my supervisor. If you're a senior leader in the organization, ask my supervisor is probably not the right answer, because you're expected to understand the culture, understand all the regulations and the laws affecting the industry. So I think almost back to what you were talking about, Jennifer, is like, as people are growing up with these tools, how do we make sure that they understand what's okay and what's not okay? And on the academic side, you've also even now got AI helping you spot AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a kind of a meta mind-blowing concept.
Yeah. I think, partly when you say meta mind-blowing AI, it's also partly about curiosity and encourage curiosity, isn't it? Don't take stuff at face value. And that's the very start point for us. Okay, we want you to communicate that. Okay, let me just unpick that a little bit. What's that about? And I think curiosity is a much undervalued behavior in organizations that we need, particularly doing what we do. It is that curiosity and that thirst for making sure that we have got the knowledge in order to do what we do with some credibility, frankly.
And we've talked a little bit about some of the negative consequences of AI, but there are some actually great applications of where it's being used. UCSF just did a study of using AI in trauma centers and being able to put in symptoms / issues and having it come back with if this, and this are happening, here's the treatment, and saying that it's as accurate as some trained EMTs in an emergency room. So there are some times when this can aid people. What have you seen in terms of aiding communications folk out there, in terms of tools that can take the mundane jobs and do them as effectively or perhaps more effectively than what the human mind can do on its own?
Yeah, there's a lot of content that communicators get involved in their organizations, which you really could put into a machine and have it spit out for you and do as good a job, which leads me to say, well, then why are we dealing with that content? But some of it's just got to get out there in terms of routine announcements. But there's definitely some benefits there, but you still need people who can interpret whether what they got back is good or not. Here's a great tool. I've had to use this myself in a few situations where I thought that the client's personnel would just sort of nod up to doing a particular document. So, well, run through this AI engine. This will help you smooth it out and put it together. And then they got it back and they said, could you look at this? So we're ultimately going to be the AI editors. I think you still need the human editor looking at some of this stuff. But a lot of the mundane things communicators get involved with, that can go by the wayside. You can have the machines do that. I think it's when you get involved in things that are involving critical things with human health, safety, the safety of communities, that you can't just put that on autopilot and forget about it. You got to be closely involved in that, and that's, I think, it's where we can spend most our time as communicators. I wish it automatically did everything you wanted to do. So I have to work on all these routine press releases and announcements, but it's not there yet.
I think earlier Jane was. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. Earlier Jane was talking about the importance of training your AI. And so a situation where I think my organization has seen great success is where we were looking at existing content that was created, vetted by our branding teams. All of the information is correct. Then we use AI to then say, let's collect all of our internal knowledge, summarize it so that folks can better identify which, for example, knowledge articles that they want to pursue. And so that, training the AI, this is the set of content that we want you to consider, and then give us those summaries, rather than looking at, hey, let's create brand new, which to George's point is going to require a lot of review and validation before we can say this is good to go.
And I think that, so I'm curious, Tosh, in your situation, are you making employees aware that AI is being used in that tool for them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's the other side of the ethics question is whenever we are using AI, we make sure that we indicate this was generated through AI. And so it's, just as I also think about now they have the capability of, you don't have to take notes. AI will listen to the conversation and summarize, create the summary of notes for you. And in many cases, the folks who are running the meetings will take a look at the notes. They're like, these look good, but then they still say summary generated through AI. So it's just informing folks that one, it kind of demonstrates the value of AI, but that also confirms that just want you to know we were using AI. It was listening to you. It's generated this summary.
Mm-hmm. And I think that disclosure is so important. I work with a colleague who works with an agency here in Vancouver, and they've really been at the forefront locally, at least, well, Canada-wide, of the use of AI, like for a couple of years. And so they used as a bit of a marketing strategy, and were fully transparent with their clients. We will use AI to generate the first draft of your annual report, your quarterly earnings summary, etc. We are then going to bring you the benefit of our human-led team to fine-tune that and bring our understanding of your tone and culture, etc. But we're going to save us all 2 weeks worth of drafting time to get to that first draft. And they've done extremely well with it. I did it once with a script. I was early, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago or so. And I was brought on by a client to write a script for a CEO. And I said to them, do you mind if I experiment? And I guarantee you, I will look at the work afterward. And in my clumsy way, I probably wasn't great and still am not with using prompts properly. So I didn't love the first draft, and I probably ended up putting more work into it. But I was grateful for the opportunity to kind of play around a little, which I think we all need to do, as long as we're, again, straightforward about it. Did save me a little time.
I'm reminded of a conversation I was having a few weeks ago from Tosh with a colleague who works agency-wide, but with startups. And they, of course, in starting up, are trying to set themselves a style and a tone, but also their own USP. We probably don't use that phrasing anymore, but determining and clarifying exactly what it is that they do for their clients and using that internal resource. And they're based in many countries over the world, even though they're a startup. So they've had an AI system put in internally, but of course, as they're developing, and this is the dilemma, I think, is that as they're developing their narrative and their stories and narrative, they would, of course, benefit from having outside input into their internal system. But then we really do get into the ethics of AI, I think. And also, what do they do with their internal resource for others to learn from? So does it become an open source? Or do we have what the way that Tosh was describing, do we have corporate AI that stays within corporate? I think it is bound to leak out somehow because technology just does do that. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how that develops. And maybe this is back to your point, Brad, about guide rails and how we ethically manage that for the benefit of a greater community than just single communities, given that we're also interdependent.
I pair that with the idea that I don't think in schools people are being taught critical thinking skill set.
Right.
For the longest time, we've sort of had this rote memorization, just plow it through, right, wrong, without perhaps some of the, even at the young age, having the discussions and figuring out how do you decide, and that I think may be a challenge to us, because as we also see algorithms in our daily lives, feeding the news streams that we are seeing, and those tend to often appeal to some emotional as well as intellectual. I think what we need to do is, I keep thinking, cranking up that intellectual engine a little bit so that people are able to say, that if it's too good to be true, it's, sounds too good to be true, probably is not true.
Yeah.
We're not there yet with people taking things, who take things at face value. And AI tends to exaggerate that stream, that direction, I'm afraid. I have a way of silencing this group, which is unusual.
You just gave us something profound to think about.
Exactly.
Give us a minute.
So much to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll mention something. It's worth looking at, actually. I didn't write it, but it was written by the World Economic Forum, and it was the Outlook for Jobs back in 2018. The Future of Work, it was called. And they had done a massive amount of research, global research, thinking about the impact on AI on jobs. And precisely what they said is precisely what is happening now. And I think the impact for us in this industry is because they should, communicators get involved in the conversation about how an organization's workforce, employees, partners, colleagues are going to have to shift their expertise, and how does the organization make the most of that? To your point about positivity, Brad, I think that if you think about people going into, and particularly in large organizations where they're more often referred to as a number as opposed to a person. And I think a part of that culturally comes from the fact that, we've had people who input data. We've had people who've produced invoices. We've had people who have done accounting and bookkeeping. And we've had people who've worked on shop floors. And we know about the wave of fear that there was about cars being produced by robots. Slowly but surely, we deploy people into other areas if we're smart. And I think that how that develops in organizations is really important for communicators to be involved in that discussion, to be able to explain it as well as possible, as opposed to the dramatic reverse side, which of course it's a first shock. It's kind of, okay, so we're going to be getting rid of all those automatic jobs. But if you don't continue to tell the story and say the benefit of that for you is that we're going to retrain you to do much more interesting things, which will also help us, etc., etc. I think that with communication at the heart, communicators at the heart of that discussion, I think it's really important to understand that that is potentially a massive benefit for human beings.
We are at an early stage in a lot of this in many ways, and we've probably all been in the voicemail systems or the bot systems where it doesn't think the same way you do, and you become frustrated with being able to try to reach that human being that must be there somewhere to be able to deal with your specific, that, like George, you were talking about on the New York City side of things, is maybe a corner case or something that isn't a frequently asked question that we can automate and be able to help with. So a challenge as we move away from the middle of that bell-shaped curve that satisfies the needs of the masses into the, how do we deploy resources where we need to be able to address the diversity that is out there. Because one thing that also is a little spooky is this idea of it's sort of AI and its best is rehashing stuff that already exists. Where does the creativity come? How do we make sure that the populations that have been underrepresented in the mainstreaming of technology are not even further pushed aside? Because I think that is a big concern for society going forward.
Yeah. I think that's an sorry, Jennifer. I was going to say that's an opportunity for us to step up in developing emotional intelligence within our students and within our employees within the organizations, because I think that's the difference between what AI is capable of doing and what humans are capable of doing. That's always a challenge that we have in managing folks within the organization is helping them understand how important emotional intelligence is in making things meaningful and purposeful for their peers, or for students, or where you're working with. So I think that's a huge opportunity for us to kind of shift our focus, rather than look for the patterns, look for the routines, to look for how do we really resonate with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just going to layer onto that the additional layer of global filters and factors and awareness. I'm always, one of my greatest learning opportunities in my profession has been reviewing and evaluating Gold Quill and other IABC awards entries, and I'm always my eyes are just always opened by learning and understanding the differences in the ways that communication professionals and our organizations differ around the world. And so how do we apply that sensitivity to, how can machine generated outputs introduce that human element that is, I understand things differently than you understand them. We have a very different basic set of foundational principles that bring us to where we are right now.
And if all these machines, I mean, the A is artificial, I mean, compared to the E emotional, so we need to keep that in mind. But part of me says, is it really advancing the communication profession and people's understanding of their work environment, their organization, or is it just repackaging and repeating stuff and contributing to white noise? Because it's not coming up with the new way to say something. It's sort of doing it. Any ideas of where it's going to go next?
Well, from what I see and read about this, from business people and investors in particular, tracking where to put the money in this field, is that you'll eventually, it could be, you're going to eventually get to the point maybe when these programs are actually empathetic and work like Scarlett Johansson character worked in Her, but it could be decades away. In the interim, there's a lot of applications for the technology. A lot of it's going to be in very sort of making sort of mundane life tasks and work tasks go easier, and hopefully freeing up people to do things that are just going to be more beneficial to society or to their organizations, and more personally fulfilling to them. And I think in the near term, that's the potential. I think there's some science fiction elements to a lot of this stuff, which I think color the way we talk about it. And we have to be careful as communicators not to get too wrapped up in that. I mean, 2001: A Space Odyssey is one of my favorite films. It had HAL 9000 in it, who's the computer who Stanley Kubrick 60 years said that was an AI machine. And, I think we can still get into the pod bay doors. So I think they're still open for us. We can get in there. Ultimately, I think will be a net positive, but it's going to involve some profound discussions for society about what we want that technology to do for us and how it can make the world better, and that we stay focused in that place. So that's going to, I think some of us as communicators going forward, and maybe the next generation that comes after us, can have a very exciting role in getting that dialogue going. It shouldn't just be a dialogue controlled by the people with the most money or the most influence or the most politicians that they've convinced to come on their side. It should be everybody's input should be in there. And because it's, again, got potential for profound benefits and also profound problems. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the technology is the technology. The technology is a hammer. It's a tool. It's the bone that the ape man threw up and became a spaceship. But it's created by people.
Yeah.
And if we make a botch of this technology and use it for a lot of destructive things, that's on us. That's not on the machine. It's a poor workman who blames his tools. It's us as a society, as individuals, and we all have a role in stepping up on that.
Yeah.
But I think that's where we can really do a lot as communicators and as citizens and as individuals who care about your community.
I think that's really key. And in a parallel universe, which is fantastic, the World Economic Forum pointed out that new skills that will be required will be critical thinking skills, in addition to emotional intelligence that Josh mentioned, but also complex problem solving. And I think you've beautifully articulated the complexity of that problem that will need solving. And I think that if there is an understanding that every profession, including the communication profession, requires additional skills, or maybe even slightly different skills to the, let's face it, the churning out. So maybe this is a good example. The churning out of a blog or an intranet site is probably going to be done by technology. So what does that free communicators up to be able to do to develop those problem solving skills, to be right at the heart of those conversations about how we do what we do, how we communicate what we do. So I think that's a brilliant illustration, George.
I was struck by struck by this in a small town where we have a second home. We go on the weekends, and it's out in about 80 miles outside New York City, sort of in a country area that's becoming rapidly suburbanized. So there's a lot of concern by local residents about their local sort of agricultural businesses and traditions going by the wayside, and a lot of criticism about developers coming in and throwing a lot of money around to get stuff done. So what do people do locally? They get together and they're yelling about it at each other on Facebook and fighting with people and calling each other names. And the head of the local civic association reached out to them and said, look, I'm glad you feel better doing that, but we really need you to come to this meeting down here at town hall and get involved with, that's the elected officials. They're happy to have you fooling, debating this on Facebook because they're cutting the deals down here while that's going on. So again, that's, I think, our responsibility as individuals, as citizens, as people who care about our community, as business communicators and who are members of an association, which is, I think, trying to create a humanistic vision for business, for organizations, and what technology can do for it. We've got a special responsibility, I think, to be getting people to understand that and getting moving on it, because you can't outsource these responsibilities to somebody else, to a social media site, to an AI counselor who's going to talk to you like a human being and make you feel better about things. You got to take it on yourself. It's hard work, but it's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me, if I could bring this great conversation to sort of a close, we've said it's all about the conversation and the human element. And I think that's one of the areas where IABC has historically been successful. I hope we will continue to provide that service / view of the world. I think we do bring in a unique perspective that crosses organizational boundaries. It looks inside and outside of organizations. It finds ways to make things happen. I think the other piece is that we have become better in moving away from one size fits all communications to understanding audiences and reactions and the human side of communication. So I think while we are going through challenging times and new technologies and their implications and the ethics of some of these as it directly impacts the kind of work that we're doing, we're also in a good position to be able to have those conversations, starting with the one we had today. So I want to thank George and Jane and Jennifer and Tosh for being able to join me as I've had a chance to sit in for Shell Holtz on episode 104 of the Circle of Fellows. And just let you know that 105 is coming up on June 20th. It'll happen noon Eastern time in the North American world. The newest IABC fellows will be sitting in the 4 seats that you guys are in. We've got Andrea Greenhouse, Julie Holloway, and Theo Mary Karamanis joining Shell Holtz for our next episode. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming and listening. If you do have comments, be sure to put them in. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.